so that anybody can watch and see that what risk he is taking and what is the resilience options. Next. Okay, so we need to build a risk knowledge. We have to share one before. Okay, fine. Okay, we need to share it freely, and people have to take informed decisions, and safety can only be enhanced by risk knowledge. If you don't have risk knowledge, you can't take action. Otherwise, you will be building too much or too less, and we have to get out of that loop. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt, for the focusing and highlighting the urbanization, poverty, disaster cycle, the importance of resource network and the IDRN, and giving the examples of Surat and Chennai. And I think most important, this whole approach of making risk visible through mapping, through analysis, and through projecting what are the possible scenarios. Thank you so much. Now I'll request the next speaker is Dr. Sunita Reddy. She is working in, she associate professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University. I of course met her recently, but I've been her admirer from before. I had some of her books, and then recently the Clash of Waves she presented to me. Some of my colleagues in my authority read it, you see, and they have been full of praise for the kind of research, the range and depth of research which has been undertaken by her in Andaman's post-2004 cyclone. So may I now request Dr. Sunita Reddy to talk on from risk reduction to building resilience. Dr. Reddy, please.
Respected Sinhaji and dignitaries on the dais and on the floor, I am really thankful to Dr. Ananda Babu for giving me an opportunity to be here and share some of my views on this August gathering on a very important topic, Second World Disaster on Congress on Disaster Management. Today, what I'll be talking about is actually questioning some of the fundamental issues, because DRR, though there are a lot of guidelines to carry out disaster risk reductions, but then unless we question the whole agenda of development, we won't be really taking on DRR in a very serious manner. Next slide, please. So what I'll be talking on is about risk reduction, but going into some of the fundamental issues. Coming from social science background, I want to focus more on social science issues and also some of the philosophical issues about the agenda of development and how that can be probed further to understand the disaster risk resilience and reduction. Now, if you look at disaster risk reduction in the major concepts of globalization, capitalist economies, and consumerism, we need to really think very seriously about what's happening all around us, not just in the places where we stay, smaller towns or cities, but world across, what's happening, especially in the context of globalization and consumerist culture. Locating DRR is very important in these major concepts, understanding disaster vulnerability and mitigation, then only we can see how we can think of community resilience. Next, please. Looking at the process of building modern nations, we have seen that states, nations are building state-of-art technologies, buildings and infrastructure. And the major question is development for whom? Because when we think outwardly, it looks very beautiful when the cities are high-rise and stark highways and metro stations. But then we need to really think and understand where is the development happening and who is benefited out of this development. Now, is the development equitable? Raising serious issues of distribution. If you look at Oxfam reports that 1% of the world population owns more than 99% population in the world in terms of resources and assets. Similarly, world's wealth owned by 1% has increased from 44% in 2009 to 48% in 2014, while the least well-off, that's 80% of the whole world, currently own only 5.5% of resources. So you can see the stark problem in distribution as to where the development is going and who's benefiting out of the development. So we'll further look into at what cost is this development happening. Next, please. So across cities, if you look at, environmental damages are taking place only to maximize profits for the few, not for the larger population. Mountains are vanishing. I've seen that happening in Bangalore and many other places, even in Gurgaon and Haryana, many places. Lakes are being filled up. All over Hyderabad I have seen. This is my personal observations. You must have seen that in your own places. River banks are being covered through buildings, deforestation is happening, and mining and overexploitation of natural resources. Next, please. So when we look at development initiative, we do not necessarily reduce vulnerability to natural hazards. Instead, they can unwittingly be new forms of vulnerability or exacerbating the existing ones. So it's not always that development is positive and it will lead to a betterment. Many a times it can go against and increase the vulnerability. We can look at different Indian cities where we can see that development is not in the position where we can see the risk reduction, but it is aggravating the risk for people. Be it Mumbai flood, Barmay floods, Kashmir floods, and now the recent Chennai floods. Concretization across the cities, whether on roads or buildings, leave no soft soil for the water to soak in. So that's why the cities are not even safe now, flooding each and every city every year. Next. So you can see the pictures of Kashmir flooding, Chennai flooding, even the Barmay, which was supposed to be a desert, was flooded for various developmental activities. Next, please. This is a picture from 2 years back, Uttarakhand. Now the riverbeds, on the river fronts, you can see high-rise buildings coming up. Now it's just 2 years that again the same kind of multi-storied buildings are coming up. Now this comes from the people from outside who invest and make buildings for the tourism. But really the local people don't want that kind of development in their area. But that goes with the development agenda of improving the tourism in that area. So we need to really see what we have learned as lesson from that disaster. Are we again following the same mistake, or do we learn any lessons from these? Next. How do we mainstream disaster risk reduction? So disaster risk reduction is an integral component of the development process rather than an end in itself. That's very important to understand. This mainstreaming actually started looking at in 1990s, and Provention Project, they came up with tools for mainstreaming DRR in the process, providing 14 actually guidance notes used by the development organizations. So they are short, brief, and practical. Next, please. So I won't read out all the 14. They are all very important. You can imagine that it's talking about poverty reduction. It's also talking of project cycle management. It's very important, the environmental assessment. Next. And you can see the economic analysis. Now we go for development, but what kind of economic benefits we may get in short term or long term? Maybe long term we'll lose much more than what we are gaining in short term. Next, please. So what we have to do is we have to really weigh the cost and benefits of the development and think about it. Another study which shows that global cost of disaster increased 15-fold in real, while numbers affected rose to 1.6 billion over a period of 84 to 1993 to almost 2.6 billions during the subsequent decade. So you can see if we curtail certain things, we are benefiting in a long run. Disasters are now recognized as potential threat to sustainable development, poverty reduction, initiatives, and achievements of number of Millennium Development Goals. So $1 spent by FEMA now on hazard mitigation generates an estimated $4 on average in future benefits. So we need to really put on to the risk reduction and invest in that so that we gain in future. Next, please. So while incorporating the human dimensions into development planning, our importance and our plea is to look into both production and distribution process and see how we decentralize and involve community participation, further develop activities which have human framework for analyzing these performances, and comprehensive social and human development indicators which needs to be developed and monitored, planned and progress. Next. So the program should be compatible to geographical, geological, physical, cultural and social requirements and cater to the needs of people using the local resources to sustain. And it should be sensitive to ground realities, culture and social environment, and sensitive to living environment. We have to be very careful about we have to be really sensitive about the environment. Next. So finally, I would like to say that climate change leads to increase in incidence of droughts and floods and intensity of windstorms. We are seeing that with the climate change, the increasing disasters. And our visit to Western Ghats also raised a lot of issues related to mining, related to use of pesticides and many other violation of coastal regulation zones and new ports coming up. We're already existing ports, but then because of development, we are going on with further development agendas. Next, please. So what we need to understand is community resilience can be tested to an extent. If we do all kinds of developmental activities which are out of the coping capacity of the individuals and the communities, we will be facing disasters much more seriously. So we need to really question the development agenda, be sensitive to the environment around, and take appropriate action wherever possible. But the main point is when the consumerist culture is so ingrained within us, and we go with the capitalist flow of increasing our assets and resources, thereby we, in fact, plunder on the environmental resources to an extent that we can't refurnish or recreate. And that's where we need to see that we may land up in a serious disasters where even the community's resilience will be tested to the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy, for highlighting the importance of some fundamental issues and the very basics and fundamentals of the developmental process as we undertake that, the kind of irreversible damage which are being done to the whole environment and creating new risks, and also highlighting the Prevention Consortium and their 14 guidance notes, and finally the dilemma between human need versus human greed. Thank you once again, Dr. Reddy. Now the next speaker who will speak on the role of media is Mr. Rajesh Kalda. He's Chief Editor, Times Digital, which is the digital arm of India's largest media organization, spanning the Times of India, the Economic Times, Navbharat Times, Maharashtra Times, and several other Indian languages. Rajesh has been in this for more than 10 years. His perspective is that media has a critical role to play during disasters and they need to do a lot more and better. Dr. Rajesh Kalda, please.
Namaste and good morning all. This is a question which we often ask ourselves, and also a lot of people tell us what is the role of media during calamities, and I think there are very clear do's and don'ts which we need to follow. We don't necessarily follow them the way they should, but as I said, in India a lot of things are evolving, so is how the media should respond and react to a big natural disaster. I can only say we are getting better at it. Our role not only is to tell people what is happening, but at times also stop some of the authorities from doing things which are not right. For example, during the Uttarakhand floods, every second minister wants to do an aerial survey. I am a mountaineer and I've trained at NIM Uttarkashi, and I can tell you even from 100 meters you can't know what is happening below. I don't know how anybody can see anything from a chopper which is 1,000 meters, flying 1,000 meters up in the air. I would rather use that chopper for work to help the people who need it on ground. And as you would accept and admit as administration, very often when these VIPs come, they actually take your time off. You have to take your time off to look after them, rather actually get involved in disaster management. This is very critical from what we did during Nepal disaster, Nepal earthquake last year. You know, I think we were doing a great job till the media went into self-congratulatory mode. And I don't think it helped either the people who you were trying to help or our country's image. It is not something which should have been done. You know, in Hindi we have a saying, "Neki kar kuein mein dal." I think that is what it should have been rather than doing all this. Don't use relief work as a PR opportunity for the government. It doesn't work in anybody's favor at all. Next, please. I don't know how many of you have seen this image. This is a reporter sitting on the shoulder of somebody trying to get, you know, you surely want to report, but don't try and make it sensationalist. It doesn't work at all. In fact, I think this medium, in our country's media, after the advent of television especially, does a lot of things which we as pure journalists at times find very difficult to accept. We ourselves have meetings where we discuss how do we tone down all this, can it be done or not. So in the meetings, everybody seems absolutely concerned that this is not something which we need to continue doing, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and that is where we fail so very, very often. I think this slide says it all. You would have seen the way the media, international media, covered the Paris attack last week. And you compare that with the way we cover our disasters here. There's a huge, huge difference. You know, we can give false information. We do not verify what the information is. And then I think in this race for page views or TRPs, we start showing images which you will not see any sensible or responsible media organization in the world do. I think that is one place where we need to get better at. Next, please. This slide, I couldn't find any other slides. That again brings me to the point about how careful you should be about the data that you get. Crowdsourcing is a very, very common thing these days for media. You know, what happens is I have 1,000 correspondents in the Times of India, but incidents can happen at 1 million places. And all the people with a mobile phone and social media access are potentially my correspondents. But while it's a big positive, there is also a very big risk in it, because how do you use information which has not been verified? And I'll just give you an example. There are also these apps available which people can misuse and spread disinformation, which one has to be very, very careful about. And I think the role of the media, when you have excess of information and you have to sift what is correct and what is not out of it, is very, very challenging. Not to do with disaster management, if you remember during Delhi elections, Kiran Bedi, who is stated to be India's first woman IPS, there was a tweet which went out, and then it started going viral on the social, how there was somebody else who actually was a week ahead of her. And how did that come about? Some very mischievous guy put the picture of an IPS woman officer, and you know, you have these apps which make it seem as if it's a 45 years old picture, and it made it seem as if she was the IPS officer a week before she did. A lot of people fell for it. And a lot of big media houses actually used it as well. I think this is where what I mean, that information flow is a good thing, but sifting the right information from what you have is a bigger challenge. And I think it's something which we all need to work very, very consciously at. Next, please. This is very critical. You know, you shouldn't get into the way of relief operations and, you know, asking questions like, "Aapko kaisa lag raha hai?" You know, can you imagine if I go to this guy, shove a microphone, you know, at him and say, "Aapko kaisa lag raha hai?" There was a train accident in Bihar 7-8 years ago, and there was this image of a person whose face was stuck to the grill of a window. And I still remember a reporter asking him, "Aapko kaisa lag raha hai?" And the next day we read report that the person could not be rescued, and he died in that position. You know, for me to look at that image, I actually want to go and take that correspondent to task. It's the insensitivity which just doesn't go well with anybody who's trying to report a disaster. We try to avoid that very clearly. this is a very critical element of disaster management now. You know, whatever you look at the cyclone Hudhud, which everybody talks about. How is it that it did so well that we didn't have a single casualty during a cyclone? Because people worked together, people exchanged information, and full marks to NDRF and the authorities for taking preventive steps. It is something which made us proud of what our authorities can achieve if they work together, and also the way the media played a role in making sure that the right kind of information is disseminated to the people at the appropriate time. This is something I think somebody was talking to me about yesterday, the role of media for cross-sharing information. We get so much into this game of one-upmanship that if I have, see, I consider myself to be the largest in the country. I am the largest in the country, but there are so many places which I don't get to. At that time, if somebody else takes my information and shows it to others, so that even if 5 people are, you know, if 5 people get impacted, get benefit from that, I should be okay with it. At that time, I think we should do away with things like, it's my property, how have you gone and shared it with anybody else? All these things we need to take care of. Next slide, please. And this is one area where we have started looking at quite seriously within our own organization about, there are often times when we reach a place before some of the rescue operation guys. Are our media teams trained for that? Next one, please. So, you know, I remember one friend of ours who actually went to area for disaster coverage in Chhattisgarh, and a lot of people were dying there because of malaria. He also caught malaria there and passed away. I am saying a reporter who goes to cover disaster should also know how to protect himself. You know, only then can you report or even save others. I'm very proud that I do CPR courses. I have done my mountaineering course. I spent about 10 days in Uttarakhand when the floods happened. We try to encourage a lot of our colleagues to do that as well. Next, please. Thank you very much. That's it. I have stuck to my time.
Thank you, Rajesh. I think you very rightly and very well through your illustrations highlighted the role of media, the sensitivity, the biases, the balance which must be maintained. Very crucial thing about, while it is important to be quick and have speed, but at the same time veracity and the correctness of the what one is reporting is maybe more important, you see. And then finally the use of social media, crowdsourcing, etc. Thank you very much. I think it was very, very enlightening. And I've had the personal experience of working with media. When Gujarat earthquake took place, the Bhuj earthquake took place around 8:45 in the morning. I was in Delhi. I used to be Joint Secretary in Government of India, handling this charge. In the afternoon, around 3-4 o'clock, the crisis management group met under the chairmanship of Cabinet Secretary, and they decided that within 1 hour, a team will be sent to Bhuj to broadly, get a broad idea of what has happened, you see, how much, how big, how grave, how serious is the situation, so that Government of India knew at what scale to respond. Otherwise, they had no detailed information, you see. And we were given just about 1 hour's time. And around 8 o'clock, I'm cutting the whole story short, but around 8 o'clock in the night when I reached the collector's office in Bhuj, he was sitting outside his collectorate under the tree, and there I found that one of the news channels, I don't remember, was already there in Bhuj, you see. And I think from the government side, I, along with medical doctors and seismologists, etc., we were the first team, but one of the media channels had also managed to reach there, you see. So that's very true. Right now, go to the role of Indian Air Force in disaster management, revisit to relief missions undertaken. We have very eminent speaker, Wing Commander Mr. S.K. Ahuja, who will talk about this. We all know about the role of the armed forces, and especially in difficult terrains and all that, the critical role played by Indian Air Force. So, Wing Commander S.K. Ahuja, please.
Good morning, everyone. One of the roles of the Indian Air Force, apart from fighting at the front with the enemy, is to fight the enemy of the disaster. And the seriousness that we give to this subject is reflected by the very fact that we have with us today the senior most officer, Assistant Chief of Air Staff, Air Marshal Butola, who's Vayu Sena Medal, Vishesh Seva Medal. He is the key person and the senior most person who controls all the disaster relief operations in the Indian Air Force. Next slide, please. The scope is as flashed. I will not take a lot of time into statistics and whatever we have done. I would rather spend the maximum time on takeaways and the way forward, how we can improve in our future operations. We from the Air Force are, next slide please, are the first choice for the distant places, just because we have a facility to reach at narrow valleys, snow-covered, high-altitude hilltops, where others can't in a short duration of time. The roles are as flashed. Next slide. As far as the capability goes, we are equipped, very well equipped, as far as the machines, and I assure you that we are a very, very motivated and a potent man and women behind the machines which we hold. Next slide. The reach is as reflected on the map, that is on a short notice, we can reach to the places as depicted on the slide. Next slide. However, the organization, which has been covered already yesterday, so I'll not dwell upon it much, but it is available at all levels, Air Headquarters, Command, and the Station Headquarters levels. Next slide. The important here, which is painted in red, is the number to note, and the fax number, which I'm going to announce now. You can directly come and contact on these numbers. However, on a parallel route, come through Military of Home Affairs, Ministry of Home Affairs, as well as the MOD. The resident state commissioners can note down the numbers. 011-2379-573-4 is the fax number. Next slide, please. Once the requisition agency requisitions the air support, then there are some few small requirements from us to operate. The ADAM arrangements, not in terms of comfort, but in terms of fuel to operate the machine. A pilot can fly without the food or water for 2-3 days, which has happened in past. Like case in point, I myself was there in Nepal to begin with the operations, and for 2 days, the entire contingent survived on 1 packet of Maggi each. However, the machine cannot fly. I wish they could without the fuel. Next slide. Another important aspect which brings out is the public awareness and the media awareness, which my colleague has just covered against the negative reporting, and where the media personnel want to get in by force and start reporting. Instead of carrying a media person, I'll be able to carry one more casualty and save one more life. That needs to be understood. And as painted in red, that children and women are first. This is the company policy. Next slide. Certain major relief operations internationally undertaken just for academic interest. Next slide. Next slide. And as shown on the map in red dots, where the Indian Air Force has operated. Next slide. Now coming to the case studies, next slide. Op Rahat, we named it in Uttarakhand, the flash floods, which we all are aware of. 3,613 sorties were flown, and which rescued 23,893 people, evacuated, and some 864 tons of load was dropped over these places within a short span of time. And this was the biggest ever helicopter operation in a small restricted place, in which a lot of helicopters and fixed wing aircraft participated. Next slide. As the tempo or the figures unfolded of the extent of the damage, you will see flashed on this slide that the number of aircraft kept increasing. Next slide. Then next came Op Rahat, which was the largest winching operation ever undertaken. Winching operation as is depicted in the picture. Next slide. Op Maitri in Nepal earthquake, where 8 helicopters were inducted, and the figures are just for academic interest, not to gain any mileage out of it. Next slide. Certain national relief missions undertaken. I know the statistics are not really welcomed, but they are important to call out certain important lessons and work out that we are better off the next missions onwards. I wish there are no more next missions, but so be it, we have to live with it. Next slide, next slide, next slide, next slide. So the total effort in last 5 years by the Indian Air Force has been over 10,000 sorties, in which we have flown close to 5,000 hours, and we have inducted 3,349 tons of load, and some 57,179 people have been evacuated or rescued. Next slide. So out of this experience, it just goes on to show that we as a force, we are a potent force who have a vast experience in all kind of disasters, and we are the people who reach on the site mostly the first because of the virtue of the air power we have. The certain challenges which you need to note down when you requisition, that we operate from extremely non-standard and unfit places, which is dangerous for flight safety. Obstructions. Fuel is a big issue. Like in Uttarakhand, there was no fuel available at the forward places where the Air Force was operating from. Innovative methods were used where fixed-wing aircraft were flown and the fuel from one aircraft was transferred to the other aircraft. Weather, of course, is a hazard which you need to understand and not demand unrealistically. Maintenance and administration are small hiccups here and there. Next. Aviation is risky business, you all need to understand. Crowd control is very, very important aspect. And ignorance of people. People need to be aware and educated, and the responders, the organizers, the people who are on site, the commanders, they need to understand that there are limitations of air power. You cannot carry excessive amount of loads with each person. You want to get evacuated, come with limited load. You will help. Maybe instead of 10, I'll be able to lift off 15 people in one go. Next slide. The another important challenge, or the most difficult challenge which we face, is about the communication, which is very, very important. One has to understand that the initial phase is very, very critical, in which maximum lives can be saved. As the disaster keeps getting delayed, the time passes, the number of lives will be lesser and the coffins will be more. I'm sure nobody wants it. So it is important for all the commissioners or all the resident commissioners to inform who is the person to contact on site, who needs to prioritize, where do you need to go first. And if required, the Indian Air Force will give you a sortie on site. You can take an aerial view and decide which area is to be prioritized. Local mobiles and local numbers, which generally the pilots or the operators who reach there don't have, would be a handy and a great help. And airspace management is a challenge, where in a small valley, 45 aircraft operating, risky. Next slide. Now I come to the meat of the matter, that is takeaways and the way forward. Civil and military synergy needs attention. This is the sore point with all of us, that we have to get rid of our hiccups and our ego clashes, and we need to come on ground and move into the direction of saving, not in gaining some mileage. We definitely have a good plan, as was brought out by the professor from JNQ yesterday and a student, Ms. Sangamitra, that